Hi all, so really sorry I didn't get to the end of this in the lecture time. I think I was a little bit over ambitious with what I thought I could complete within an hour, particularly given the diversity of these topics. So I just want to go over the key concepts now in relation to globalisation and colonisation, and probably I'll do this a bit quicker than I would have done in class without the discussion with you, but hopefully it'll just sort of cement your understanding of these concepts. So as we mentioned in class, globalisation is the diffusion of sort of concepts across the globe. If we look at it, there's probably very few sports that are truly global, but you can see that in terms of being played in every country and embraced in every country. But there are some sports that sort of have that worldwide appeal. So soccer's probably the biggest one of that, in that, you know, you've got North and South America embracing soccer, all of Europe, Africa, it's huge, Russia and areas there, and then just sort of moving through even within Asia now, soccer is very popular. So I think probably soccer is the only one that we can really talk about as being the global game, but there are other sports like, you know, tennis, golf, cricket goes across quite a number of different countries and continents, so different sports we can talk about as global sports. It's also going back to our concepts of consumption that we talked about in week one, this concept of global sports brands. So they can be products like Nike, and also teams. So Manchester United is probably one of the biggest global sports brand that exists at current time, just in terms of their reach and their supporter fan base. In terms of theories underpinning this area, world systems theory is quite a good one. And world systems theory in its basic form basically divides the world into what we call core countries, semi-periphery countries and periphery countries. And world systems theory explains globalisation as being the sort of spreading of knowledge, goods and resources from core countries into periphery countries. And the core countries essentially determine what is going to be globalised, and then they use the semi and periphery countries to help maintain their centrality. So if we look at Nike as a brand, that emanates from a core country in the US, but Nike use semi-periphery countries such as India, Indonesia to help kind of mobilise that product and to get it out there, but those countries never actually see the benefit of being part of that globalisation system. The benefits all go back to the core country. So world systems theory is quite useful for understanding the spread of knowledge, information or objects across, and how it diffuses differently across different countries. So we talked a little bit in class about some of the benefits, definite benefits to globalisation in terms of greater connectedness, spread of sort of different enterprises, different ways of doing things, economic growth, jobs and wealth creation all come about. And if we look about that in sport, the more people are engaging in different types of sport, and the more we can have these global mega events and international competition, the more kind of economic wealth it's creating. On the more social level, that idea of sort of cross-fertilisation of different sports cultures, different tastes, different ways of doing things, you know, enriches our culture, provides us with different experiences, caters for different lifestyles, and then one of the benefits of the globalisation of sport has been the increase in access we have to sport. So increased global media coverage of international events, and just things like with the satellite channels now, you can literally access sport from all over the world at any particular time of the day or night. So again, as an English person enjoying being able to watch the EPL and the Premier League on a sort of Friday and Saturday, I can watch all the games live if I want to stay up and watch it through the night, and it's globalisation that has allowed that to happen. Now, in terms of problems and issues, there's quite a lot in this area. So as with, I guess, everything, the sort of diffusion of particular values and beliefs and products can create and cause poverty and inequality. So going back to our Nike example, obviously these sort of semi-periphery countries where the product can be made cheaper are key and integral to the making of that product, but they don't actually get any richer by doing that. So they're involved in the globalisation process, but they're not really benefiting from it. It's the core countries that continue to benefit. So in terms of globalisation, there can be radically uneven distribution of power in terms of what gets globalised, what gets sent where and why, and world systems theory is really helpful for explaining that. It can really lead to sort of the marginalising of particular national or local sporting traditions as other kind of sports come in and take over, and just sort of take away from what's like the heritage or the key sort of values of sport within that particular country. Really seen that within African countries, and the way that soccer's taken over there has definitely been at the expense of local sports and local traditions. Cricket in India has really replaced sort of a lot of the local Indian traditions and traditional sports. Things like kabaddi and Indian games have really, not been able to maintain a profile. So, as it indicates there, indigenous sporting cultures have been replaced by market-driven sport, which definitely, obviously, we've seen in Australia. You never kind of see any indigenous sports actually being kind of played on the television, being seen or given any sort of profile whatsoever. It's completely being taken over by Western sports that have come through the process of globalisation and indeed colonisation, as we'll go on to discuss. The migration of players is a real interesting one in globalisation, because the systems and structures of globalisation have allowed professional sportsmen and women to be able to sell their wares across the globe and play, for multiple teams, play in northern and southern hemispheres. So if you're a rugby player, play the rugby season here, go to the northern hemisphere, play there, and earn double the amount of money you were ever able to do previously. But there's a lot of contentions in player migration in terms of who benefits, who values that, what are the gains for the player, what are the losses for the player, what are the issues in the country where players are migrating from, and what kind of detrimental impact it has. And we looked at this in sport, culture and industry, looking at the migration of African players into European soccer leagues. So European teams actually going and scouting Australian African talent, pulling them out of the African countries and bringing them into the European leagues, and kind of basically holding them there and them playing in the European leagues, but never really going back and playing or investing in leagues in their own country. So obviously has a negative impact on the countries' leagues, the African countries' leagues, in that they're losing key talent, they're not able to develop and bring up their own soccer marketplace. The player, if they succeed, is getting more money to go and play in European leagues, and the European teams are benefiting from this influx of different type of talent and new talent. But there's quite a lot of losses there for the host country. So migration of players is a real sort of contentious issue, and definitely one that would be good to get stuck into in terms of a debate of whether it's a good or a bad thing, if that's what you wish to do. And there's some core sort of authors there who've written on this issue. Okay, so colonisation, I see colonisation as basically globalisation and colonisation completely intertwined, and that a lot of globalisation is a sort of hidden form of colonisation in terms of the imposition of particular values, beliefs and attitudes onto societies and cultures. So globalisation traditionally has occurred from sort of Western countries enforcing their values on countries that they felt were inferior to them, didn't have the same ideals to them. Race and ethnicity has played a key role in determining who is superior, who isn't in that case. So generally, if we're looking at colonisation and the impact on sport, it's been huge. If you look at all the major sports that are played and the global sports that are played, they've largely all come from Western countries, usually Britain, spreading them during the process of colonisation. Australia is actually quite an interesting example in that the country has embraced, obviously, the colonised sports, but AFL is a really good example of sort of resistance of that in some ways. So AFL takes the sort of fundamental basics of invasion games, it takes the fundamentals of bits of soccer, bits of rugby, but is a kind of adjustment and a new type of game that emerged during the colonisation process. So it's kind of a way of saying, well, we'll take some of this, but we're going to define ourselves and our sports and make it our own. So we're not just going to do what you tell us to do as the coloniser. Gridiron in the States is also a similar example there of that resistance by countries to just accepting sport in the dominant form and kind of recreating it as your own. And as you see with AFL, particularly in Victoria, actually shaping a sort of identity, a state identity around the game and what it means. So the kind of rejection of those global values coming in and actually making it back to something local. Again, with colonisation, the most negative thing is obviously the loss of traditional Indigenous games and activities, and just completely how marginalised that is. In terms of issues and controversies, I guess there's been a good lot of debate in the academic literature on the sort of the process of colonisation and how sport has been used as a resistance tool against the colonising nation. So this idea now that the countries that have been colonised are actually hitting back against those countries that colonised them, using sport as a tool to do that, and using sport as a way to contest their kind of global dominance. So if you take the kind of the global sports, the cricket and the rugbies, soccers, and look at who dominates them now, you've seen a real rise in the colonial countries starting to do that. So Australia in cricket, India definitely in cricket, again Australia, New Zealand within rugby is a big one there, in soccer, Brazil as a colonised country, and a real sort of backlash. So kind of the debate about the bad parts of colonisation, but how has sport been used in a positive way to challenge against colonisation and the idea of dominance within those countries that were colonised, is a real interesting debate to have. There's also issues around sport for development, so the use of sport as a tool in developing countries to address social and economic issues. And there's been a lot written on that, and the chapter for your reading list is actually focusing on this in terms of, is this actually a way of sport being used for social good, or is it just another way that Western countries are imposing their values and dominating developing countries and saying how they should be sorting out their problems, but kind of dressing it up as a good thing? So is it just a new form of colonisation? So again, key authors for you if you want to focus on this area, and it really is a good sort of meaty choice to have a look at here. Eric Anderson's written quite a bit on this. As I said, there's a chapter on your reading list to point you in that direction, so potentially could lead to some really good debates in this area. So just to sum up, again, as I indicated, there's a lot going on with this topic. Ideally you'd sort of break them up and examine them individually. But I think the three of them are very much related. So the governance of sport, highly contentious and very sort of difficult to get a grip on who holds power and how and why and the intricacies of that. Globalisation and governments related in terms of international agencies and how much they regulate or control sport and the problems with that. And then the links between colonisation and globalisation. And that much of sort of the concept of globalisation comes out of colonisation and that spread and imposition of our sports on particular countries historically. So hopefully the three all tie together very much. So again, just to remind you, the reading for this week, That's really focusing on this issue of sport for development here, and whether it is a sort of new form of colonisation. So just have a flick through that. Okay, so hopefully that's sort of just summarised the last few points, and you'll have something to go at for the week 12 presentation and some knowledge to build on there.